Good to see you all. Nice to be back with you once again for our little community live show discussion, which we try to have every weekend, as you know. Saturdays, usually around 8 o'clock California time. That's typically when I do these CWJ or Christian Witnesses of Jah live discussion shows, but sometimes they have to be moved or things just come up and I have to skip a weekend, although I try to do that only if absolutely necessary. So for the most part, you can rely on, us being here every week, usually Saturday evenings California time, or sometimes a little different like today. So it's best if you are subscribed to make sure you've clicked the all notifications. That way, if I change it or just when the regular show is officially noticed, then you'll get that. It's a little extra reminder, but especially if we change it, right? Also, if you're following me on Twitter, everything I put as a post, usually, here on YouTube, I also put on Twitter. So that's another place where you can get reminders of videos like this one, or one we're going to do later today or this evening, depending on where you are. It will be evening for me, so this is our first of 2 live shows today. The second one will be on a verse we're all familiar with, I'm sure. John 10:30, I and the Father are one. And, if you just said those words and you're talking to a Trinitarian, right? Or you've been raised as one. Well, that sounds very Trinitarian, right? For them, because they believe the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit are one in terms of their shared nature. Excuse me. So when they read in the Bible, undisputedly, I and the Father are one. Well, they interpret that as consistent with the Trinity, in the sense that it involves the oneness of nature, right? That's almost always what they talk about when they quote that text. Occasionally, maybe a Trinitarian will say, they almost never say, yeah, that's unity of purpose or will, right? Which is, as I'm going to show later this evening for me, later today, maybe early tomorrow for you, depends, right? Probably for Betsy, she should be there. It's 8 o'clock. I sent the notice up, so it's already up. But as I'm going to show just by reading the uses of one or R1 in the New Testament, that it has nothing to do with the Trinity, Of course, the Trinitarians, I'm going to talk about this more in another video, right? Where this isn't really about that, but because I'm doing a video later, I'm just kind of telling you what that video is going to be about, in case you're interested. So we're just going to get into the text that really help us understand what that means. I and the Father are one. Does that have anything to do with the Trinity, right? Can that in any way be used by Trinitarians credibly as biblical evidence for their understanding of their shared nature of the Father and the Son, at least, right? It doesn't involve the Holy Spirit in that text, but ultimately their view involves all three. But we're just going to focus on what the text is talking about, Jesus and the Father. And so if that can be used to show there's a oneness of nature, well, it's not so hard to accept the Holy Spirit thereafter. But that's really the problem, right? It's the fundamental problem with the Trinity and the Bible. No matter what text, no matter what use of God, no matter what use of person, their understanding has to do with a metaphysic that came about hundreds of years after the Bible was written, right? We've got our series going on right now of early Christian views of Jesus, right? After the New Testament. And we still have a long way to go, but there's nothing at all about the Trinity. And the next document we're going to do is the Shepherd of Hermas. And then after that, we're going to do the letters of Ignatius, right? So we're going to get very much into it. Now, I'm trying to work the early Christian views of Jesus series up to the point where we hit what I believe are Trinitarian apologetics, right, or Trinitarian writers. You may disagree with me, right? Some people say, well, Greg, I don't think that's documented that right. All right, we get into the 3rd and 4th centuries, or maybe late 2nd and 3rd centuries. Some people will dispute with Trinitarians who and who isn't a Trinitarian, and I will as well. But if I see someone articulating what I believe is related to the doctrine of the Trinity, right, Council of Nicaea stuff, right? We know that there's other councils that are very important as well, Chalcedons, right? So we have a lot of different councils and creeds, right? The Athanasian Creed, right? All this false doctrine, all these attempts to replace what the Bible tells us with something else, right? Like we need something else. You want a creed? Well, why don't you just take what the Bible says and put it together? One God the Father. He made Jesus Lord and Christ. He sends forth his Spirit. There are 7 spirits before his throne. The Holy Spirit is significant in terms of our relationship with God and the Christ, but there's nothing about it that has anything to do in the Bible with a Trinity, right? So you just quote the texts that describe it, either as a person or as the personalized Spirit of God, and let people decide, right? If you want a creed, just present what the Bible says. We don't need your false doctrine, messing it up, and all this reinterpretation of the text, right? This attempt to replace the metaphysic of the Bible with the contribution of a pagan emperor, an idolater. And we're going to get into early Christian idolatry next in our 5-part series on idols. So I did part 1 a couple weeks ago. We'll have part 2 coming up in a week or so. Probably next weekend, I would say. Early Christian idolatry, which will be, of course, after the 1st century, after not New Testament, but related Christian writings and groups, and where this whole idolatry began, right? Why do, I guess I should say, so many Protestant and Catholic and other churches and groups, right? Eastern Orthodox, most of them Mormons. I mean, the idolatry is everywhere. And they're like looking at us like, what do you mean idolatry? What do we mean? Well, see part 1 of that series for what I think the Bible means. And see part 2 for where I think this whole start to uses of images and idols began in quote unquote Christian writings and groups circles, and how this ultimately then, of course, lent itself to the adoption of this later version of certain Christian groups and beliefs to fit in with someone like Constantine, right? You'd have to have some idolatry going into a relationship with Constantine, or that's just not going to work, is it? Not sure that would work. Although I'm not saying every Trinitarian or others agreed with Constantine and everything. That wouldn't be correct. Nevertheless, he did contribute the key term to your doctrine, which you shove into our face at every opportunity you can, even though your doctrine is nowhere, no place in the documents we all accept, right? We know you guys try to force it in. We get that. We're not talking about that. Like, you don't have what we have. One God the Father stuff. No. You don't have firstborn of all creation combined with a text that defines what firstborn means, and then when applied to Jesus in a non-figurative context would fit with all the other temporal descriptions and terms. used of him in the Bible. You guys try to seize on these couple figurative uses that are still of temporal subjects, right? Because it wouldn't make sense to apply firstborn to anyone but God, unless you're in some kind of pagan or mystical writing, like Dr. White once tried to do with the Kabbalah. It's a long story long ago. I don't think he does that anymore, though. Either way, that's more medieval Jewish mysticism stuff. So again, that's the company of the Trinitarian understanding of firstborn in the Bible, right? It's not credible in any sense, right? But what else are they going to do, right? It's all subject to reinterpretation, as we know. Depends on whether or not it agrees with the Trinity, right? That's pretty much it. So, but I wanted to just kind of mention those things because they do come up with our, of course, ministry and people we know. And I have a show later. That's really what that was connected to kind of help you understand where I'll be coming from and where I'm going overall with the Trinity stuff, right? I mean, we've got 25 parts done. I thought the last one was probably one of the best too. It kind of went back to Galatians 3:20. I'll probably clip that as a separate smaller video. I have a lot I want to do. That's one of them. But I thought that actually came out even maybe a little better than some of the summaries or the explanations I gave in part one. But in part one, we had the apologetic nuts, right? And we were just starting out the show. And we made the point, but I was trying to give more of a build up on the context and, still get a sense for how I wanted to do the show and deal with the nuts, right? I think, and then they came back in part two, right? But then I think we blocked most of them by part two, so that by part three they've kind of shown up here, but it's just that they've mostly been blocked because they're not sincere in their contribution, or they went crazy, right? Some of them are okay, but a lot of them are just nuts, and we're not here to be distracted onto every little comment they come here to make when they're not even commenting or questioning or citing a text that relates to exactly what we're talking about, right? If you really want to get my attention on a live stream about the Trinity, well, then you should at least talk about what I'm talking about, right? Like I'm going to break my whole format, and I've done it a few times, and it never really adds to the overall content of the show, right? It's sometimes a little funny, but that's not what I'm really here for. I'm here to help you and me, and for us to grow and to become a better group of people who want to do what we believe is right, according to the Bible, according to the best available evidence that we have, right? But a lot of what we do then gets caught up with some of these issues that really on the larger scale of things, they don't matter, right? Maybe we help a few people. Certainly we make a defense for the truth here and there. And it is true. And I was just saying, I've got 25 parts on the Bible and the Trinity and conflict alone, plus all the other stuff, right? But that's because Trinitarianism has been here for at least about 1700 plus years, right? And so when it comes to Christianity and Christian discussion and Christian theology, you need to know about the Trinity, right? It's going to come up. Someone's going to see you're a part of a group, excuse me, that doesn't believe in their heretical views, the Trinitarian stuff. And they're going to try to make you think you're a heretic for believing exactly what the Bible says. One God the Father, right? Or we use Jesus' answer in John 10. I'll be talking about this more later in the second show today. I and the Father are one has nothing to do with the Trinity, John 10:30. But in that account, of course, as we know, Jesus does what? He deals with the exact same thing that we often deal with the Trinitarians. Of course, they mistranslate John 10, 30 through 36, where the part gets to them accusing Jesus of being theos, right? And they translate that capital G-O-D. Most Bibles do. I think the NAB and the NWT are the only ones, a few of the only exceptions. But Jesus' answer is to quote a text, right? Their accusation is to use theos in the singular. We don't know what, they didn't use capital G, or it was all capitals, right? Uncials. They didn't use our system of differentiation of capital and lowercase at that time. So which is it, right? It's either a God or God, pretty much. And they say capital G-O-D. Okay, so they're accusing him of being capital G-O-D. We don't accuse you of of doing works, right? But of blasphemy, because you, although being a man, make yourself God, right? They're not even consistent when it comes to that. When it comes to, bring that up, John 10, 30, and we can go to the Bible Hub as well. But wasn't really going to get into this too much. But let me just finish what I was saying. And then we can talk about it if you want. But otherwise, we're going to get into some CWJ, non-Trinity stuff. I do have the emblems as well. We will be partaking as well if you came for that. Have your bread and wine ready, probably in an hour or so, right? I'm here for up to an hour to 2 hours, at least once a week, so that we can just talk and hopefully build each other up, right? And encourage each other, bring others together to do the things that honor the Messiah, honor the Father, show that we have the Spirit. And so, as I was saying, just to conclude the John 10, 30 through 36 thing, right? Jesus answers to quote Psalm 82. Isn't it written, I said you are gods? So if he called those whom God's word came against gods, what's the problem with me being called a god if God sent me? If we translate that God, right? And remember, Jesus says, because I said I am God's son, right? That also proves he's saying he's a God, one of the sons of God, whom God and Jesus say are gods. So he even interprets it, right? Let's just go to that real quickly. Should we bring up the Bible? Let's bring up NWT real quick and check it just so we get the context right. It's important. We understand this, right? Because we want to do what Jesus does. When these things come up, I don't think we need to get that technical, right? I think we can just present what Jesus says. And if they don't like it, well, that's too bad. Right? So they say right here, John 10:33, Jews answered him. First he says, I displayed many fine works from the Father. For which of those are you stoning me? Verse 33, we're stoning you not for a fine work, but for blasphemy. Even because you, although being a man, make yourself a God, right? Perfect parallel. Just like in Philippians, although in Philippians 2, NWT doesn't do what I would do and will do. And that is put, although he was in the form of a God, took on the form of a man. He emptied himself and became a man. That's what it's saying. They're just so obsessed with reading the Trinity into the Bible. Or in the NWT's case, use of capital G in Philippians 2, in the form of God. They mean, right, that he was in the form of God, as an image of God, that he looked like God, as the character, tes hypostaseos. Temporality for sure, no way around it, and separation of nature, which is exactly what that always means. So, we don't need to use the Trinity. We use the Bible to understand God, and that's it. Okay, as you're going to see it, Trinity not only conflicts with the Bible. As we get into Athanasius and all these other false teachers and liars, I'm going to have probably a 25-part series just on Athanasius. We're going to go through all of it. I'm going to show you how insane he was. What a false teacher and liar he was. Why anybody who would ever quote or use or follow Athanasius is just like him. A false teacher and liar also. That's just the only conclusion you can reach if you've read what he's written, because it absolutely is in contradiction to the Bible. Just reinterprets everything. In fact, everyone, all this stuff the Trinitarians are using today, like 99% of it is stuff back from these earlier false teachers and liars. So they've been repeating themselves over and over to generation after generation. It's unfortunate. We want to try to help, but try to understand not everyone is a extreme heretic like Athanasius or Sam Shamoun, right? They're very similar in their just overall apologetic insanity. Sam is sort of his own special case of of issues, but he's similar in that way, right? Just a very non-biblical and false presentation of what the Bible teaches. Athanasius, he's one of the all-time heretics and liars, right? He fit perfectly with Constantine the idolater, and as I believe, right, became this dragon with two horns like a lamb, Athanasius and Constantine, right? These false representations of what you might think is a Messiah-like political entity or Christian entity, but it wasn't. It never has been. It's a dragon that's just been lying to everybody, right? What does a dragon do? He's the father of the lies. And we've got people out there as apologists for Satan. What next, right? So Jesus says, I think that's a parallel, right? Fits perfectly. They're both anarthrous, right? No article. You can still translate anarthrous nouns if they're used in a definite way with a capital, but I don't believe either one of these is used that way here. Jesus answered them, is it not written in your law? I said, you are gods. If he called gods those against whom the word of God came, the scripture can't be nullified. You say to me, whom the Father sanctified and dispatched, you blaspheme because I said I'm God's son. So that right there, what does that tell you at the end of verse 36? That tells me that the accusation at the heart of this, you make yourself theos, he understood to mean God's son, which is exactly what is meant right here when Jesus, in his own defense, quotes a text where his God and Father, John 20:17, Revelation 3:12, calls other sons of God gods. And then he goes on to parallel himself with those sons of God who are called gods and says, I've been sanctified and sent by the Father as God's son, not as one of God's sons whom God went against. So we have Jesus himself right here responding with a plural, theoi, when being accused of being a singular. Whether you want to call it God, capital G-O-D, or a God, forget that for a moment, okay? I think we just made clear how that should be translated, but now that we've talked about that, and right before we get into our other stuff, and I have many videos on this, of course, and I think it's part 2 in our series on the Bible and Trinity and Conflict. Look, he right here is quoting a text that uses gods in the plural for an accusation being made about him of God in the singular. And what do Trinitarians do today, everyone? What does Rob Bowman write in his book about this very issue? One of his books. That we can't use a plural in response to their arguments about a singular use of theos. Oh, really? Why not? There's really no good answer or reason. You're just alleging that because singular uses are made of Jesus, he's a single subject, I'll point out. Why would a plural be used of him? But they try to create this special category like they always do, right? They always try to create this special exception just so they can try to claim there's something different about their argument. And they try to claim, well, all these texts use the singular of Jesus, right? John 1:1, John 1:18, other texts that allegedly call Jesus God in the Bible. So you have to show us an example of God in the singular where that's done of someone other than God. Well, we can do that. We can do it with Moses. We can do it with the angel who's called a god in Greek and Hebrew in Judges 13. We can show that it's used of a future child Messiah in Isaiah 9, translated by the singular for angel. So when the angels are called gods in Psalm 8:5, translated by the plural for angels, what's the difference? Yeah, I know there are other qualifiers for the angel or God in the Isaiah 9 text because he is special. That's why he's called only begotten God. That's why he's called the archangel, 1 Thessalonians 4:16. That's why he's the great Prince Michael, in my view. But yes, there are certain special, but they're the same category or relationship, right? He's called an angel there. Even if he's the archangel, and that is different, he's the ruler, he's the chief one. You guys deny that, even though you accept it in other texts, at least some of you. So it's, we're back on the Trinity again, aren't we? Anyway, I wanted to talk about it because we're going to talk about it later. And we have these texts, and so you're reinforced to understand what's happening. This part right here, this last part in verse 36 often gets ignored. Jesus is understanding this whole discussion as God's Son. Whatever they're calling him right here, and it's theos, right? And his answer shows this is Jesus using the plural. So I would ask Rob Bowman and anyone else who wrongly follows him in claiming we have to use a plural example to somehow explain when the singular is used of a single person like Jesus. Okay, fine. Judges 13. I believe verses 19 through 22. We'll go to it in a second here. So that's already in my writings. We have Jesus qualified in the singular, only begotten God, in a way that doesn't fit the Father. A totally different qualification of his nature in the sense in which he is a God. And again, so you can be appointed as a God or be an actual God based on your nature. You're being a spirit. You can't be appointed a spirit, right? Moses can be appointed as God. Angels can be acting as God or be considered gods, but they're all spirits, God and the angels, the sons of God. So there's a difference between their actual nature, just like we're men or females are women, but we're flesh, right? Our nature is flesh. There's some sense in which man reflects our nature, just like with woman, and the same with God, or being a God, or a son of God in a spirit sense. Or maybe you're another type of spirit creature that isn't explicitly called a son of God or a God, but is categorized in some way like seraphs. So, or the living creatures. So there are some spiritual beings that may be different. That's why the Bible speaks of authorities, powers, angels, and only really one explicitly, in my view, as the archangel, unless you believe Michael and Jesus are each an archangel in the Bible. And again, we allow for that as Christian Witnesses of Jah. We try to make things easy for people. We understand the damage that's been done by groups like various Trinitarian associations. Excuse me, throat's a little dry. But we're willing to accommodate you to the extent that you need to be in order for you to just sort of remove yourself and thinking from a lot of this false doctrine. We think texts like John 10, 30 through 36 can help you do that. When you look at them in light of Psalm 82 and all the uses of sons of God in the Bible, right? For the angels. 4 different angels. Let's go to I brought up Judges 13, so let's go to that real quickly. Right? This is a text I talk about in my writings, Jehovah's Witnesses Defended. And we've talked about this in my videos about the angel of Jah, and in some of my other videos about angels as gods. But the angel of Jah in the Old Testament, I believe, would be one you would want to go to. So in Judges 13, the scrolling's a little slow right there, but it goes so fast when I do it the other way. Judges 13. Oh, I just had it. Went back. Okay, here we go. Yeah. So when someone brings up that terrible argument, right, that you have to use a plural for God if you're going to show how somehow considering Jesus God in the singular doesn't mean he's God Almighty, but a son of God, a God in the sense that the sons of God are gods, not polytheistically in the way that the nations considered all these different gods as somewhat equal or assigned to different aspects of life in ways that don't ultimately fit what the Bible describes, right? And even Trinitarians are telling everyone and quoting 2 Corinthians 4:4 that Satan is a god. He's a real spirit. He's alive. He's called a god, the God of this system in the Bible. So the idea that somehow Trinitarians don't believe in other gods, right? But 1 Corinthians 8:4-6 says, even though to us there's one God, there are Trinitarians, many gods and many lords. That doesn't mean that we're that's not even a term used about, right? Polytheistic. They just use that pejoratively, even though again they're promoting Satan as a god, and so are you polytheistic Trinitarian? I did a whole video and discussion of this, didn't I, on the Bible and the Trinity and Conflict series. I'll try to clip the monotheism discussion. I think we talked about it in a couple because someone brought up monolatry as well. And then we talked a little bit about that in a separate video. But in this account here, right, in Judges, it's about Manoah and his wife, right? And it says in verse 17, Manoah said to Jehovah's angel, what is your name? That when your word comes true, we shall certainly do you honor, right? And this is all after the appointment of the angel in Exodus 23 that would have God's name, right? And he's the one who argued with Satan over Moses' body, according to Jude, Michael. He's the one, he's the great prince of Israel, Daniel 12:1. Right? So who else would be there doing all this stuff? No explanation has been provided by Trinitarians that makes sense of all those connections that show that really, while there are other angels, like in Daniel 10 and elsewhere in Daniel and elsewhere in the Bible, there's one primary angel, right? There's, whether it's this one or not, in places like Joshua 5 and elsewhere, it's clearly designated as the prince of Jah's army, right? Just like Michael's designated especially as the great prince of Israel. So in this account, we have this special angel. They're asking him about his name. Jehovah's angel says to him, why do you ask about my name when it's a wonderful one? Manoah proceeds to take a kid of the goats and grain offering to offer it up upon the rock to Jehovah. He was doing something in a wonderful way while Manoah and his wife were looking on. Verse 20, so it came about as the flame ascended from off the altar heavenward. Then Jehovah's angel ascended in the flame of the altar while Manoah and his wife were looking on. At once they fell upon their faces to the earth, Trinitarians, all the way down. Like face on the ground, Trinitarians. As this angel is ascending, they're bowing down with their face to the earth to that angel, Trinitarians. And verse 21, it says, and Jehovah's angel did not repeat appearing to Manoah and his wife anymore, proving that's who just appeared to them in that flame. It says that, right? Jehovah's angel ascended in the flame while Manoah and his wife were looking on. At once they fell upon their faces to the earth, Trinitarians, all the way down. Face flat, Trinitarians. Because they try to make an issue out of that sometimes. They're terrible when it comes to comparing texts that use terms that they try to overuse, right, or wrongly use. So many instances of people falling. Revelation 3:9, right? I'll make those who are of the synagogue of Satan come worship before your feet. Where are the feet, Trinitarians? All the way down, right? So you can be made to receive worship in ways that don't make you God. It's very clear in the Bible. We don't understand why you don't accept that, or seemingly don't when it comes to texts that involve Jesus, who's been appointed with given all authority, right? Given all authority, Trinitarians. God, no one gives God authority. This whole exaltation and praise, false analogy you try to create, which is just so pathetic. I'm going to do a separate video about it as well. But it's so obvious, right? I mean, no one even asked me about it. So lame and such a dumb attempt, right? You're just misusing the word exalt. And you don't understand what it's really talking about in texts like Psalm 46 and elsewhere. And then you try to compare that to Psalm 2. It's pretty bad. It's bad stuff. Anyway, let's finish this right here, right? So, verse 21, Jehovah's angel didn't repeat appearing anymore. Then it was Manoah knew he had been Jehovah's angel. So, Trinitarians, what does the Bible say that Manoah knew the being that ascended in the altar? Who does it say Manoah knew it was, Trinitarians? I know in your Bible it says angel of the Lord. Okay, setting aside your blasphemous translation, removal of the divine name, I think you will agree it says it's an angel, right? Manoah knew it was Jehovah's or the Lord's in your blasphemous translation. Angel, right? So what does it say in verse 22? Consequently, Manoah said to his wife, we shall positively die because it is God we have seen. I think the NWT translates this incorrectly. I think pretty much every Bible translates Judges 13:22 incorrectly. Let's go to the Bible Hub. We know how to resolve text, right? While Bible Hub may not be perfect, of course, it provides us with a list of translations that we can effectively use together, and also access to the Hebrew and Greek. So let me bring that up. We'll get into other stuff. I've got plenty of time, and I'll try to keep this under 2 hours. But, right, sometimes we'll talk about stuff. We already know we don't primarily use this for discussion of false doctrine, but we'll be talking about it later, and it comes up. And I want you guys to be prepared, right? I want you to know how to quickly think about these things. So it's a reminder. We'll get into some more ministerial stuff in a moment. But, we need to have a little refresher. We haven't talked about these texts in a while. So let's go ahead and go to John 10. Oh, I'm sorry. No, Judges. We were in John 10. Judges 13. Let's go there real quick so you guys, right, maybe this is your first time, you need to remember this, right? There's an argument out there that's been going for a long time that was put forth at least as recently as Rob Bowman, probably by someone before him, Trinitarian, but certainly by him most recently and as well known in his writings. He would often say that it's not, I believe he brought this up in our debate. I'd have to watch again. It's been a while, right? But either way, they will often say that when you try to use texts where angels are called gods, like Psalm 8:5 or Psalm 82, they'll say, well, that's a plural. And Jesus is called God in the singular, right? Like John 1:1, even though it's very clearly differentiated there from the God. So it would have to be a God because it's presented to us in terms of theos, not person. So to not represent that distinction in the translation is itself proof that your loyalty is to false doctrine, or you're just pathetic in your attempts to represent the text. Either way, Trinitarians try to say that even John 1:1, even while we set aside all that other, what I just said, or John 1:18, we set aside monogenes and we accept theos as the reading, or any other text that they accept as the singular theos for Jesus, they'll say, see, that's singular. But you're saying Psalm 82, Psalm 85, that's plural. And remember what I said earlier? Who was the first to respond to this issue, and what did he do? What did we read in John 10? Why do I emphasize John 10 so often? Because I believe it's the key. It's the ultimate, right? There's so many. I mean, I know it gets lost in all the other obvious evidence against the Trinity, but we haven't really got into it since part 3, and maybe we got into it in a few other videos. I think like the video on 1 Corinthians 8:6, and the one on monotheism we talked about, where I referenced we talked about monotheism. It's important we understand this, right? It's important you understand that the first person who shows that this argument that we have to use anything but a plural for theos to demonstrate what is meant by the use of a singular for someone other than God, or someone who's contested as to whether it's God? No, we don't. The person who we are discussing did this first. The very person that we're arguing about, Trinitarians, responded to the use of a singular for theos in John 10, 30 through 36. He responded to the accusation he was a singular theos with a plural for theos. So no, we don't have to use a singular. You have to start listening to Jesus, don't you? You have to start accepting the fact that a plural for theos actually explains what is meant by the singular when used for Jesus. But you don't, because that's not your doctrine. You reject Jesus. You reject what Jesus says in John 10:30 through 36, don't you, Trinitarians? You totally collapse on it and say, no, can't use a plural. No, where's the singular? No, we don't need the, we can do that. We're doing that right here, Judges 13. But again, everybody, the Trinitarians have collapsed. And what they've done in the process of collapsing is they've confused a lot of people, right? They've made people not able to understand one of the most simple sections of the Bible, John 10, where we have our Lord and Master, right? In an argument with false teachers and liars who accuse him of being theos in the singular. And his response is to quote a text that uses theos in the plural for other sons of God. Right? Simple. Done and done. No, but we get all these translations of the Bible, the majority, right? Like 85, 90% or more, that fail to translate John 10 correctly. And so we get people confused about what Jesus was claiming to be. We get people who don't understand why he would quote Psalm 82 and use gods. And we even get people who claim we can't do that. Why? Because you don't want us to. Right, I get it. Well, we don't care what you want. We'll follow the master instead and just leave you behind with your false doctrine. Judges 13, I think that was 22, right? Yeah. So here we are, right? This is the text we just read from NWT, Judges 13:22. Consequently, Manoah said to his wife, we shall positively die because it is God. Excuse me. Capital G-O-D. And I don't agree with that, right? NWT is not perfect. We know that. No one has ever said it is. And anyone who says it is wrong. But it's a lot better than all these other also very incorrect in many places texts or translations, right? So that's not like a huge deal. They just translate it with a capital. I don't think they should translate with a capital G in Isaiah 9:6 or 9:5-6 either. It clearly is not referring to God in the way that would be representative. It's more declarative in the same way that John 10 would be, in association with him being one of the sons of God who are gods, versus say John 20:28, where right after he's telling us who our Father and our Father and his Father and our God and his God is, he represents God and is spoken to in that way. So that's similar to, of course, the angel in Revelation 22, right? Who breaks and then resumes after beginning speaking for God. So there is a need to understand what's being presented to us, but certainly in John 10, right? And here, right, we have the angel actually in its spirit nature ascending in the flame off the altar. Manoah bowing down with his face planted to the earth. And then right after acknowledging that he knew, right there, he knew what they were seeing was an angel. Right after that knowledge is made explicit in the text for us, very next verse says, we shall positively die because it is God that we have seen. Now, this would have to be either very similar to John 20:28, right? And we do have this angel speaking as God, right? This angel has been all throughout, and really multiple books of the Old Testament, right? Speaking as God, just like angels often do. But here we have a little bit more direct involvement, right? The angel is involved with Manoah and his wife, ascends into the altar, into the flame of the burnt offering to Yahuwah, right? Very similar to the Christ. I think this is probably Michael, right? Probably Jesus in his pre-incarnate state, prefiguring him as the sacrifice to be given to God, ascending off the altar. But it explicitly refers to him as Jehovah's angel, the angel of Yahuwah. And then it identifies that angel as either God or a God. Let's look at the Hebrew and Greek. Right, so here's our other translations. We just saw NWT. NIV, we're doomed, he said to his wife. We have seen God, right? And this contradicts what? This contradicts what is explicitly said to Moses and confirmed by Jesus in the New Testament book of John, right? You can't see God. You cannot see his face and live. Here the angel was clearly there, clearly visible to them, ascending in the flame that they were viewing. And they're saying, we have seen God? So maybe you can get past the contradiction of whether or not anyone has seen God part, but it's clearly talking about the angel, right? We just showed that through the longer reading of the context leading to this point. This being ascending off the flame that they're talking about, that they already face planted right in front of. But it's an angel. Is it calling that angel God or a God? Well, every single one of these texts, including NWT, except the Net Bible. Look at this. The Net Bible says, because we have seen a spirit, a supernatural being. Now, I believe that is the best translation of all of these. Let's see what happens when we get additional here. And that's all that. Yeah, okay, that's the end of that. Let's see if any of these foreign language translations indicate. There's more on this side. Okay. All of them are saying God, capital G, right? Every one of them. All across the page. I'm on the third column now. Every single one, including the NWT, except the Net Bible. See, that was an all-inclusive statement with an exception, Trinitarians. The whole video on it. Several, in fact. Right there. A supernatural being. I believe that is correct. So let's look at the Hebrew. Right? Sometimes you can't tell. Because sometimes there isn't the use of an article that would make it more apparent how to translate. You'd still have to determine whether it's a representational role, right? Or an ontological reference, right? Or a designation of an individual apart from being a representative. Like Moses, like Jesus, right? So here you can see in the Bible Hub, right? So go down the second to last line. You can see the word God right there. Made it a little bigger for you there. You can see there's the word God, and here's the word Elohim. So once again, we get a use of Elohim, right, in a more majestic or honorific sense, not used of a plural subject. It's explicitly talking about an angel of Jehovah, but it uses God in the plural. There's no article. So there's absolutely no reason you couldn't translate this because a God we have seen. And that would be more consistent with what God said to Moses and what Jesus taught us, that no one can see God. And John 1:18, right? No one has seen God at any time. Well, here's a time where all of those translations we read, except the Net Bible, even NWT, is contradicting John 1:18. And so you need to be careful, right? All these Bibles have failed to understand that this is talking about an angel as a God here. Exactly like John 10, where Jesus is accepting the term theos in the singular as a God, one of the sons of God, and that is why he used the plural for the sons of God in his defense and explanation, which ultimately concluded that he was claiming to be God's son by the use of the singular. And that's exactly what we believe, and consistent with the other sons of God being called God. Psalm 82, Psalm 85. Did a whole video on it many other times. Right here, we have an identified subject, an angel of Jehovah, being called the singular. This is not a plural. That's why all those translations, even though they missed the capital and indefinite article part, except the Net Bible, none of them use the plural. They all at least understand this is not a numerical plural here, right? We're talking about a single angel here. And if we go to the Greek, Judges 13:22. We can see here, right here, verse 22. And this is the end part right here. Hati theon idomen. That a god or God we have seen. This is the singular for theos. So whether you translate it as God, capital G-O-D, like every Bible except the Net Bible, or whether you translate it as a God or a supernatural being like the Net Bible, this is a use of the singular theos for an angel. Not theos in the Hebrew translated by the singular for angel like in Isaiah 9. This is a text explicitly referring to an angel. It says Manoah knew he had seen an angel and then said to his wife, we shall die because we have seen theos, which I believe should obviously be translated a God. Not only because that's clearly what it means contextually, but to prevent the contradiction with what God tells Moses and what we're told in the New Testament by Jesus and by John. So here you have it, right? So Bowman and every Trinitarian like him is not only wrong when it comes to whether it's appropriate to use the plural for theos in a discussion about whether Jesus is the singular for theos. That's in fact what Jesus himself does. We have texts that use both the plural and the singular for angels. Here, the singular text in the Psalms, God of gods, plural. Of course, Psalm 82. And here's your singular usage, okay, Trinitarians? So can you try to educate your followers of false doctrine to stop lying to everybody where it concerns our use following the master of the plural in response to your failed attempts to document a proper understanding and usage or translation for the singular in most cases for Jesus in the New Testament? Here is your text, okay? Not only do we have a justification and basis for using the plural in response to a discussion of the singular, because Jesus himself does it. So your very claim we can't do it is a direct contradiction of the master. You are in total defiance of an explicit biblical account that does what you say we can't do. We don't listen to you. We follow the text. And if you want a text using the singular for theos so badly, so you understand why we believe angels can and are considered God or gods, and even a God or a supernatural being, NET, here. Stop bothering us, okay? I gave this to you over 20 years ago. I've given it to you several times since. I'm sure many others have as well. For some reason, you just don't listen. So, if you do find anyone who has been infected with false doctrine about this issue involving the singular versus plural for theos, just remember what I said or try to condense it and summarize it in your own words. Cite the texts that show exactly what we're talking about and they contradict what they're doing, right? John 10, 30 through 36 provides an example of exactly what they say we can't do, use the plural for discussion of the singular. And Judges 13, 22, in fact, provides an example of the singular or theos of an angel. And they explicitly knew it was an angel. Right? It says that right here, very preceding verse. So let me go back to it right here. Right here. That an angel of the Lord, this one. It couldn't be more manifest and clear, and yet we have to go over and over this, right? And sometimes it's helpful. I want you to understand. I want to understand this can be a beneficial discussion. I hope this has been. It's not primarily why we have the CWJ discussions, but occasionally, we're not tied to any format. This is like if we were coming to meet together in a way that just sort of naturally led into these discussions. I don't really have a pre-planned agenda for these shows. I do have a couple of things I'm going to get to right now. First, let me look at your comments. Let me bring up your comments because I want to make sure I don't miss anything. And let me greet everybody as well. I know we kind of got going, but that's what we come together for, right? We got Miroslav GL. Thanks again for the super chat, GL. Let me see what he says. He says, hey, Greg, thank you for giving the opportunity for people that work mostly nights to be with all of you for live discussion. I really appreciate. You're welcome, GL. I appreciate your contributions and zeal for the ministry and for Christianity and for what we do as a group of people to try to promote what we can show is true without any or as little controversy as possible, right? We have David Bradbury. We have Everett Commodore. Good to see you, Everett. We have David Bissack, or as it's listed, Bissack David. It's always a pleasure. We've been having some lively discussions. It seems like you take it the right way, so that's good. And don't, I take yours. I hope I try the right way, right? Anytime we're dealing with text, it's not always easy because we sometimes have opinions and ideas, and nobody wants to be. I don't like to be corrected, but sometimes I am, and I have to accept it. It's just life, right? But then I realize, okay, now I know it better. So I've learned to get used to it. Of course, our doctrine's so simple. It's not what I'm talking about, right? We know that. And it's just like, why just read it? One God the Father. Even when we were in Watchtower, right? Or where that's not changed. Many of us anyway, we were brought together through association with groups that had a lot of other stuff. A lot of other beliefs and ideas that aren't things that the text we were looking to as our ultimate guide, even in those groups, right? They would over and over pretend like they follow the Bible explicitly, or they think they do. And in many ways they do, but in many ways they don't explicitly, right? Well, we're not required to follow you for doing that. You tell us to trust you completely. We're not required to. What? What are you talking about? After all you've said and done that's not correct? Yeah, we get it. People make mistakes. So why are you trying to get people to completely trust you then? You're just like people who make mistakes, and hopefully you don't make as many mistakes because of what you should know by now, and yet you keep doing the same mistakes over and over again. Well, that's not a good sign. Or you're claiming people are things that aren't even here yet. Great crowd. I mean, these aren't minor things. These aren't things that are hard to see. They can take a little time when you grow up in association with groups that teach all this other stuff that you're more so interested in, right? Not all these things are manifest to people who first come into contact with a group, right? Whether you're a Mormon, a Catholic, you could walk into a Catholic church and stare at a bunch of idols. And I was when I was younger, I had to go with a group that I was vacationing with. And they were very nice, but it was very creepy, right? And I'm sure to them it's not, but to me it was, because it's all the idols and stuff. I'm not used to that. It's not what I read in the Bible, and it's not what you do as Watchtower. So in any case, at some point, everybody reaches a period where you realize there's a problem with something. Something's not quite right. And you either do something about it or you don't, right? And it's not like a set time for everyone. We're different people, different circumstances. We should try to be accommodating to people who are misled right now, right? It's not going to do us any good to view the Watchtower in a hateful way or to think of them in a very negative way, right? Obviously, we have concerns. They think of us as like apostates, right? We're like the worst of the worst. You know how unhealthy and terrible that is? Especially when we're actually trying to help the things they allegedly believe in most in terms of the Watchtower. Right? Allegedly, right? The primary things are similar to what we believe, but yet their ultimate loyalties show that that's not really true, or they wouldn't put everything on the same level as the three. So there's some problems there, and we're not required to keep following people who have been demonstrating that they're not qualified to stop teaching things that are incorrect, that we can show are not true, that their own writings show aren't true, right? Why do you keep telling people they're the great crowd when you don't even believe the great crowd is here yet? The only reason could be you believe we're so close to the tribulation that you're lying to people and gaslighting them to prepare them, right? Right now, if you're John the Baptist and you really are sent by the Holy Spirit and you're preparing people for something that's actually going to happen, well, that's a great thing. The problem is what you've been telling people has not happened so many times. It's inappropriate to continue to act like somehow you're qualified. Somehow there's no reason to doubt you. That's not appropriate. If someone has misrepresented something or failed in understanding something like 4, 5, 6 times and made a big deal about it and forced people to believe it was true or they would avoid you completely, right? A lot of pressuring. Well, how many times are you going to rely on a person like that? I would say almost never. Not after, maybe after one time, maybe. After 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, you don't learn about all those times and the significance of them right away, right? It takes a little while for different people. But once you do, you have to make a decision. Same with the idols in the Catholic Church, right? Same with the idols in false doctrine in the Protestant Church. Same with all those things in other churches or groups, Mormons, Eastern Orthodox. They have all that stuff. Now, I'm not making it up. I'm not just saying, oh, yeah, and we're great. No, look, we're aware of what's going on with you guys. We talk about it and discuss it with you often, and we just don't see it in the Bible. Right? We're not interested in that stuff. No idols. Thank you very much. We could do something a lot better with our time and our money than make an idol. and in any way use it as part of anything involving our religion. Right? We haven't been told to do that. Where's the command that says to do that? And is the command to keep doing it? Right? Remember we talked about the copper serpent in part 1 of 5 on the use of idols series I have going on CW Jah Talk. No, they later took it and broke it because it was being misused. Because people were using it beyond what it was supposed to be used for. Even an idol that God commanded to be made. We have all these idols everywhere. We're warned about idols in the New Testament. We're warned against idolatry, right? We're told we're not going to inherit the kingdom. These people are out here practicing all this idolatry and creating all these terrible arguments, following idolaters like Constantine, right? Redefining God's nature, taking his name out of the Bible, promoting people who are blasphemous and offensive like Sam Shamoon, right? I mean, how much worse can it get? Combined with their political history and acting like a dragon with 2 horns like a lamb and fighting wars and killing people in the name of Christ from Constantine to today. Right? We understand sometimes you have to defend yourself. Sometimes you may have to cut off an ear. Sometimes you may have to go to war. You've been acting like a dragon with horns like a lamb for a long time, Protestants and Catholics and everyone else who's a part of that lineage of a false doctrine, and political merging and spiritual fornication, right? Demonstrated by Constantine and Athanasius, as for example. So we have a lot of problems going on there, and it therefore is not unusual when we encounter people that need some help. That's why I wanted to dedicate the first part of this show to some of the issues, and give you a little bit more extended understanding of concepts in the Bible involving plurals and singulars, and how Trinitarians sometimes go off the deep end when it comes to defending their doctrine, totally ignore the master, can't even identify an example of a text like we just did that does exactly what they're telling us we can't do and would have to do, even though we can do what they say we can't do because Jesus did it. And we can also do what they say we should do after telling us we can't do what the master did. You see what I'm saying? Oh, that is what happens with all the false doctrine. Let me go back to finish up the greetings. So I ended with Everett right there. Jason. Pink Moon, good to see you. Oh, I appreciate that, BJ. Thank you very much. We got some more stuff here from Everett. That's good stuff. Yeah, I think you're right, Everett. Hebrews 1, 3, 8, 9. 8, 9 as well. Right, I think the translation issue, I think I resolved that in the video we did on this subject. I even went a little further than I do in my current editions of JWD, but that I'll get to in probably either another edition or in another writing, where I talk about how when I was preparing for the video in the Bible and the Trinity and Conflict series on Hebrews 1, 8, 9, or inclusive of those texts. I just read, usually what I do when I'm dealing with a text-specific issue, I read the context leading up to it, right? I go back a couple chapters at a minimum and just start reading so I can try to understand. And then it just comes up, right? It comes up as you're thinking about things, and then keep reading. And that's what I did. And in doing so, I saw exactly what was happening in terms of grammatically. It was basically the same thing. Just, about a chapter or just below a chapter after the text in Psalm 45, where we get the quotation. And in the Greek text, there seemed to me, right, because the translation issue with the Greek and the Hebrew is often one where the Greek will use a verb more explicitly, like a form of a me, more explicitly, I would say, than in the Hebrew, for sure. The Hebrew can convey an existential idea verbally, but it's commonly omitted. And in the translation from the Hebrew into the Greek, it's often omitted as well. Sometimes it's used, but often it's not. It follows it very clearly because you have Jews translating it, right? So they're also very familiar with this understood verbal idea that they can see in the Hebrew. And so I think we've effectively, in terms of, I have another explanation I give that's also consistent grammatically with what you can show in my JWD editions. God has enthroned you, basically. There's another way you could view that text. And how I think is consistent with what I also talk about in the video I was just mentioning. But I explain a little bit differently grammatically in my JWD writings, and I add more to that in my video in the Bible and Trinity and Conflict series. So definitely try to look at both if you're going to discuss that verse with someone, because I think you'll be able to see in my writing or my video what you'll be able to use from the context to explain how that should be translated. God is your throne, or God has enthroned you. Not your throne, O God. And even if that were the case, that's not inconsistent with our view. It's inconsistent with theirs, right? Because again, they're redefining and misdefining the term God or theos, consistent with the Trinity, to mean a person of God. Not God in the sense of an angelic son who represents God by being enthroned by God, or as a God being one of the sons of God, like we read about in John 10, Psalm 82, and Judges 13. So when we see text calling Jesus or the angels God, just like we did just a second ago, all those translations use the capital G-O-D for an angel. Judges 13:22. And I don't think that's correct, but they're doing it. So what are they doing? What do they mean? Right? It's not, then it's hard. We have to explain it. And it's a contradiction to what is stated elsewhere in the Bible. So why not just translate it what is best according to the actual subject in view, an angel, and so therefore a God, one of the sons of God, whom God and Jesus say are gods in Jesus' case, in his own defense when he's being accused of being a singular, which he defines in verse 36 of John 10 as God's son. That's what he means by theos in the singular Trinitarians. That's why you have the variant reading, most likely, in my view, in John 1:18. Only begotten God, only begotten Son, monogenes huios, not monogenes theos. It's the same thing. A son of God is a God. That's what sons of God means in terms of the Hebrew idiom that shows a categorical relationship between those who are sons of and the subject. So, and we see that explained and documented elsewhere, like in the text I just showed, Judges 13, where we have an angel of Jehovah and a fiery spirit flame off an altar being worshipped, Trinitarians, all the way down, face to the ground, and called Theos in the singular, or Elohim. So why are you arguing with us about this? Why are you asking us for a text that you should have already found out if you're actually looking for this stuff? And I've written about it, right? Several decades ago. And we still hear about it. Unbelievable. What we got going on here? Remember, we have another live show later today. I put the notice up. 8 o'clock California time, 8 p.m. We're going to do the bread and wine here in probably 30 minutes or so, and we'll wrap up this show. But we'll read a few more texts in a minute. Let me see who else we have in the chat, though. We had BJ. Rise said hi to BJ. Dave Biss, I said hi to Dave. We have Joke Sorinen. I may not have said that right. I apologize. Maybe it's Yake. Sometimes the J sound, we mispronounce that often in America because we're so used to saying J. But it's more like a Yake. Maybe Yake Saarinen. So that's a good group. Nice to have you all. All right, let's let me bring up a few texts that I wanted to share in terms of our association and some of the things that I think it's important for us to be mindful of as people who want to have healthy families. We want to contribute to our society, right? We want to be productive members of society. You decide, I decide how that all works out in terms of what we choose to do. As long as we are united in our belief that there's one God the Father, Jah, Jah-O, Jah-Oah. If you want to say Jehovah or even Yahweh, we'll accommodate you. But Yahweh is really something that we'd probably want to just at least talk to you about to make sure you understand that there's really no basis for the final part of that name, way. Certainly no theophoric evidence, that is, names in the Bible that incorporate the divine name. There's no evidence that supports that ending. There's no ancient, that is pre-Christian, phonetic evidence that represents that pronunciation. It's really several hundred years after the New Testament was written that we start to get some representations of Greek forms of divine names that are attributed to the Samaritans in contrast to the Jews that sound like Yahweh, with the Jews saying Yah or Jah, like we read in the Old Testament and in Revelation 19. That's why we're Christian witnesses of Jah, right? So let's go ahead and let's see. Let's turn to and read Luke 21. I'll bring up the NWT so you can read it with me or listen. Luke 21. And after this, we'll go ahead and we'll have the bread and wine. We'll just kind of do a basic show. I'll look at the chat one more time in case you have any questions or things you want to talk about. We'll talk a little bit about this. So probably within another 30 minutes of show, we spent the first part of the show basically kind of just reinforcing some ways to discuss issues that frequently come up when it has to do with the Trinity and texts like John 10, and how to effectively reference and discuss texts that provide evidence that we're often asked to present, right? We know that can be a waste of time to do that all the time, but this is a subject that comes up, right? The Trinity is like probably number one in terms of what people, now I don't think that's good, and I don't really think it should be, and we should make it that, but we can't find ourselves ever doubting when we have evidence in the text that we can cite and make it clear that no, you're incorrect. You're saying this to people about plurals and singulars. That's incorrect. Because of all the damage that it's caused, right? All the false doctrine, the misunderstandings. Right? We saw that also in the Alpha and the Omega video I did, right? Revelation 1:11. You read that in the King James, there's no way you're not going to come away thinking Jesus is the Alpha and the Omega. And yet, as we showed, he's never presented as saying he's the Alpha and the Omega. Presented as the first and the last. And elsewhere, God calls himself the Alpha and the Omega, beginning and the end. The one who is and who was. And then in Revelation 22, the only time all those terms are used together, it's explicitly being used by an angel who explicitly is speaking for Jesus and for God. We went through it in detail. And it's very clear, right? So it seems to me probably, even though we have the Alexandrinus reading where it calls God first in Revelation 22, or at least it uses that term in Revelation 22, but in Revelation 1 and 2 uses firstborn. That aside, if we do accept first in Revelation 1, 17, 18, and Revelation 2, 8, 2, 7, 8, and first in Revelation 22, well, why couldn't the angel who we already can see is speaking for Jesus, I'm coming quickly, and then immediately starts speaking for God before Jesus speaks, even says he's the Alpha and the Omega, in between which John interrupts and identifies this angel and acts inappropriately, right? The angel started and then resumes speaking for God and Jesus. So there's no reason that angel then, when it uses all three terms, couldn't be just speaking for God and Jesus and using first and last, Alpha and the Omega, beginning and the end. There's certainly no explicit evidence that identifies Jesus as the Alpha and the Omega in Revelation. Nothing. He's explicitly identified as the first and the last who became dead and came to life again. Both times. Which is not how the Alpha and the Omega, first and last, beginning and end is described in Revelation 22. And it's not the same terms used in Isaiah 41 or 44, right? Yet Trinitarians in their translations and their arguments, they just ignore all that stuff. And they ignore Habakkuk 1:12, which proves that when Jesus is the first and the last in relation to his being the firstborn from the dead, or dead at all, he can't be Jah, God from eternity. The Spirit, Luke 21. Luke 21, we'll read through Luke 22:20. And then we'll partake, give thanks, and then I will see you again later. Luke 21. Where was that? Oh, yeah. 21:29. Are you ready? Make sure my throat is good, right? Let me see. All right. I just seen if my son was still here. Luke 21:29. With that they're talking about Jesus. With that he spoke an illustration to them. Note the fig tree and all the other trees. And that's an example, I believe, Luke 21:29. Not to divert too much, but let me go to Facecam or split for a moment. What was that we were doing? Because I think that's another use of other, but it just says all trees, and yet it refers to the fig tree as an exception while referring to all trees. Exactly like Colossians 1:15, firstborn and all things. Luke 21:29, I'm pretty sure. Let's just verify. I think I talked about that in my part 17 video, which I'll clip that discussion on other. And we've talked about other. But I like to remind myself, and we're already here, right? So Luke 21:29. Yeah. You can see right here, he says, and he spoke another illustration to them right here. Look, the fig tree and all the trees. Panta ta dendra. All the trees, Trinitarians. right after referring to a tree that would have to be, you know, part of all trees. But it separates it with Kai, the fig tree, and all the trees. You know, just like in Colossians 1:15 through 17, Trinitarians, when it refers to the firstborn and all things, with firstborn defined for us in the Bible and only used of temporal subjects, figurative or literal. Okay? So, yet look at your translations, Trinitarians. Now, NIV does it literally, I guess, you know, in terms of if you're talking about word for word, but use of other in terms of explanation, right? NWT uses other without brackets, but obviously they obviously aren't as concerned as they are in some of the instances of other with brackets in Colossians 1. Nevertheless, other's not explicit in the text. It just says Panta Tadendra, New Living, any other tree. English Standard, all the trees. New American, all the trees. Net Bible, all the other trees. I believe it was a Net Bible, the only one that got Judges 13:22 correct, right? In terms of the contextual explanation and translation. It's not confusing and contradictory to, for example, John 1:18. Let's see, where's King James? All the trees. American Standard, all the trees. All right, so we have a couple that use other like NWT. But it just says Panta Tadendra with an exception explicitly made. So keep that in mind when you're dealing with Colossians 1:15 issues. Let's go back to our subject reading. Right, but I want to point that out. We're right there. Why not? So, verse 30, when they are already in the bud, by observing it, right? He says, note the fig tree and all the other trees. When they are already in the bud, by observing it, you know for yourselves that now the summer is near, right? Something that pretty much we all recognize as we've grown to become familiar with the things that happen seasonally. So he's using those kind of things they can relate to. In this way, you also, when you see these things occurring, know that the kingdom of God is near. Verse 32, truly I say to you, this generation will by no means pass away until all things occur. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will by no means pass away. Right, and we know, of course, the generation issue facing a lot of Watchtower people right now. It was really one of the overriding reasons why a lot of people, I think, stuck around, because even though, as we've talked about, and if you've become familiar with the issues, know that the 1914 date does not have anything to do with what the Bible presents. It's based on a misuse of the times in Daniel 4 that have nothing to do with anything else explicitly in that context or elsewhere than with 7 years passing over Nebuchadnezzar. And so this taking of a day for a year from other books of the Bible and putting it or using it in a context where it's not used or explained and used that way is inappropriate. You don't have a basis for doing that. It's inconsistent with how other texts like in Revelation make clear what times are, right? Specific days, specific months that calculate years, just like in Daniel 4. I did a whole video on this. There's a lot more. And then, of course, the explicit evidence that the kingdom was born in the first century, that Jesus at God's right hand, given all authority and power, Matthew 28, is ruling until 1 Corinthians 15, his enemies are put beneath his feet. He doesn't start ruling after they're put beneath his feet, Trinitarians. I'm sorry, not Trinitarian. Watchtower people. I mean, there may be some that take, right, because the last enemy, death, is put beneath his feet until the end of 1,000 years. So they don't all have to be put beneath his feet for him to reign, nor is that what the Bible teaches. There's a lot of problems there, but this generation thing, right, people who didn't know the deep aspects or the real truth about 1914 and the times of Daniel, 7 times, not knowing all that, thinking that it has some credibility, because on the surface it does, right? It looks like it uses the Bible and incorporates elements that, without, again, that extended knowledge and understanding, you would probably accept for a while. And then together with that, and certainly the majority of Watchtower people believe and follow, with that was this generation that whoever was alive and saw the events of 1914 wouldn't pass away until Armageddon, right? Even they announced it for decades in the Awake magazine, right? And so now they've changed this to a different understanding that basically allows them to extend the generation indefinitely, because if you've known someone who knew someone who knew someone who was alive and saw the events of 1914, all those people are part of the same generation, according to the Watchtower's current understanding, which has nothing to do with the Bible. So it's a problem, right? They're not going to let it go, is what I'm getting at, everyone. I'm sorry, Watchtower people, I know, right? But you came there for what? Did you come there for God the Father, Jesus is the firstborn Son, the Messiah, and the Golden Rule? Okay, then come with us, right? And then do your own thing once you're strong enough, whatever. But you're welcome to come here. We believe all those things. We don't have any of that other baggage and heavy yoke that you don't need to carry around because of their failures. It's time to let them go. It's time to let them go, because they're not going to let go of this false teaching, this false chronology that constantly puts you in the mindset that you have to keep following them and giving your money to them and support them as Christ brothers, or you're going to be destroyed. That's a lie. You're supposed to be partaking with us and helping other people, and not supporting a bunch of liars who, in spite of whatever good they've done, just like any other group has done some good, refuses to stop doing bad, or what we are told not to do. It's not about making mistakes. It's about explicitly denying what's true. And we have a requirement to stand up for that, no matter what the cost. And it's not even close to the cost that the master paid, or that you might have to pay. So what? So people don't like you anymore because you don't believe exactly what they believe about all this stuff that they're not even supposed to be believing. What does it matter? Does it matter what a bunch of people who've been lied to and refuse to accept the truth care about? Why? Because you're familiar with them? Well, then stop telling Catholics and others that they're just believing what they were raised to believe. You're no different. Okay? If that's the case, fine. Stop being such a hypocrite, okay? Verse 34, but pay attention to yourselves, right? So that generation thing is going to be driving the Watchtower people nuts. We can try to help as many as we can. We know the damage it's done, and that they should never have put people in that position. And they're not going to let it go. They're just going to keep holding on to this self-appointing chronology that entails all this false doctrine that they're not even supposed to be writing about. So let's just be prepared to help as many people as who genuinely believe in our core beliefs as possible, right? Or just people in general. If you can help them, help them. But obviously we know there are people who go to the Watchtower because they think they're going to try to slide in to the new heavens or new earth, right? And that's all they care about. Well, those aren't the kind of people we really are interested in. Right? Maybe they change. But if they're that selfish that all they care about is themselves and all these false teachers and liars and this scheme they have going, well, you get your reward. You get a false teacher's reward. Jesus explicitly told you, do not go after them. They come, they pretend they're me, they say the end is near, don't go after them. You do it anyway. Pay attention to yourselves that your hearts never become weighed down with overeating and heavy drinking and anxieties of life, and suddenly that day be instantly upon you as a snare, for it will come upon all those dwelling upon the face of all the earth. Verse 36, keep awake then all the time, making supplication, that you may succeed in escaping all these things that are destined to occur, and in standing before the Son of Man. So by day he would be teaching in the temple. That was Jesus talking. But by night he would go out and lodge in the mountain called the Mount of Olives. Verse 38. Excuse me. And all the people would come early in the day to him in the temple to hear him. Now the festival of the unfermented cakes, the so-called Passover, was getting near. Let me stop for a moment. Notice, I think this has some significance, right? He tells him to keep awake, make supplication, escape everything. He says, and then it says, by day he would be teaching in the temple, but by night he would go out and lodge into the mountain called the Mount of Olives. All the people would come to him early in the day to hear him. Now that doesn't mean you can't, right? We have like this show in the early day, right? Sometimes it's just convenient. Sometimes that's just when we can have a show or when we can meet if you do it in person, right? But I will say, how many groups actually follow this? They have a lot of evening meetings or services, right? Is that really the biblical model? Maybe there's some examples, of course, in Book of Acts and elsewhere where that would be appropriate. But it sure seems to make more sense that the instructional times when you might come together. In our case, again, we're dealing with a whole global time zone issue, so I can't quite accommodate that linearly, but certainly regionally where you are, the idea is to get the most out of it. Maybe coming together early in the day is a better option. Again, maybe that's just not going to work for you schedule-wise or your culture or the way it works in your area. I get it. This isn't like don't ever do a meeting at night, but I think a lot of people are put through a lot of evening meetings or services and ways that, again, not just Watchtower, but other groups, but certainly with Watchtower, this evening requirement, it's not the healthiest time for heavy instruction, I don't think. People are tired, spend a long day. What's the example of the Bible, right? Again, you could probably justify that on some level, but what's best? What do you think would make the best time for instruction to people? You decide. I just want to highlight that here in this section. All right, chapter 22. We're just going to read another 20 verses or so. Partake of the bread and wine, and then we'll move on. But I will be back for another live show later. Evening time if you're in California. Verse 1, chapter 22. Now the festival of the unfermented cakes, the so-called Passover, was getting near. Verse 2, also the chief priests and the scribes were seeking the effective way for them to get rid of him, for they were all in fear of the people. Verse 3, but Satan entered into Judas, the one called Iscariot, who was numbered among the 12. Verse 4, and he went off and talked with the chief priests and temple captains about the effective way to betray him to them. Right, so here you have Satan entering into the heart of someone predisposed, jealous of Jesus, to betray him. So we need to be careful, right? We know we have apologists of Satan out there. We have satanic individuals blaspheming the name of God and the Christ by falsely representing him, by acting in terrible, horrible ways that have nothing to do with him. So there are people whom Satan will enter and take advantage of to try to betray us. We have to be careful. Don't be paranoid. Don't worry all the time. Just don't be dumb, right? Don't be ignorant. Pay attention. What did he say? Keep awake. Oh, and verse 34, pay attention. That you don't get weighed down, overeating, over drinking. It can happen. We all know. But if you let that happen and you're in a condition where you're not making supplication and trying to stay alert, you're going to have someone who has bad intentions potentially used to subvert you. And it says that the chief priests and captains and the people that he went off to betray him to rejoiced, agreed to give him silver and money, right? That's all they care about. That's what they want, money. Give them nothing. You keep your money, you're going to need it, and you use it wisely for what you're going to need to survive. And you help people where you can to help them survive. if they're in that condition, right? Good Samaritan, don't forget it. Verse 6, so he consented, talking between Judas and all the betrayers and false teachers and liars. And he began to seek a good opportunity to betray him to them without a crowd around. Verse 7, the day of unfermented cakes now arrived, on which the Passover victim must be sacrificed. And he dispatched Peter and John, saying, go and get ready for us to eat. They said to him, where do you want us to get it ready? Verse 10, he said to them, look, when you enter into the city, a man carrying an earthenware vessel of water will meet you. Follow him into the house into which he enters. I often get Trinitarians telling me like stuff like this, or him seeing Nathaniel under the fig tree means like he's somehow God, right? Even though he explicitly tells us that in John 7, 16, 17, for example, that what he teaches isn't his. In John 12, 49, and 50, that he's speaking what the Father tells him, just like John 14, right? The Father's in him telling him what to say. The idea that he wouldn't be able to determine something else going on with the Father in him telling him what to say, this is why talking to some of them, right, it just gets ridiculous. But, they've been damaged, right? Some of them just misled, and maybe they haven't heard our side before, because Trinitarians don't represent it, right? We already know they certainly don't educate people about kathos in John 5:23, right? Or all the exceptions, all-inclusive statements with exceptions, including in Revelation 5 itself, while they simultaneously attempt to use the latter part of Revelation 5, totally ignoring the first part, right? It's just like they just don't care. A lot of them just don't care. Or they're so deceived and dishonest. How could you not read the preceding verses? How could you not answer this yourselves, Trinitarians? You mean to tell us this false doctrine has that great a hold on you? Why? One God the Father, right? Sons of God are gods, or God in the singular. Judges 13:22. And he said, right, okay, you'll find this person, follow him, meet him into the house. Follow him into the house into which he enters. And you must say to the landlord of the house, the teacher says to you, where is the guest room in which I may eat the Passover with my disciples? Verse 12, and that man will show you a large upper room furnished. Get it ready there. Verse 13, so they departed and found it just as he had said to them. And they got it, and they got the Passover ready. Verse 14, at length, when the hour came, he reclined at the table, and the apostles with him. Verse 15, and he said to them, I have greatly desired to eat this Passover with you before I suffer. For I tell you, I will not eat it again until it becomes fulfilled in the kingdom of God. Verse 17, and accepting a cup, he gave thanks and said, take this, pass it from one to the other among yourselves. Verse 18, for I tell you, from now on I will not drink again from the product of the vine until the kingdom of God arrives. Verse 19, also he took a loaf, gave thanks, broke it, and gave it to them, saying, this means my body, which is to be given in your behalf. Keep doing this in remembrance of me. Verse 20, also the cup, in the same way after he had the evening meal, he's saying, this cup means or is the new covenant by virtue of my blood, which is to be poured out in your behalf. So one of the key features or reasons why we have what I try to make a weekly live discussion with all of you from all across the earth, as many of you as there are, as long as there are two or more willing to meet, we know, according to Matthew 18, he is with us. We also know from texts like that we're to continue to do this in remembrance of him. While we understand that many people who are associated with the Watchtower at one time may have some difficulty because of the false teaching that we're not supposed to do what we're explicitly told we're supposed to do, and which wouldn't make any difference for them anyway, right? Are the people in the Watchtower who don't partake not going to die faithful to Christ if they're required to? Well, that's what it basically means you're willing to do, and in addition to proclaiming the coming of the Lord, right? So there's really no, other than them thinking they're of a special group of people or different group of people that isn't here yet, and that they wouldn't qualify for as anyway, right? Because they know who Christ's brothers are in their mind. So how could they possibly fulfill what is said in that text, which is a rhetorical question? They genuinely don't know, right? And yet the great crowd associated with the Watchtower today genuinely does know what the text says. The great crowd that isn't here yet, but that will arrive, doesn't know. Think about that, Watchtower people, because we want you to join us, if not in terms of our association identity, then certainly in our spiritual practice of proclaiming the coming of the Lord, partaking of his body and blood, not wrongly, not because we're trying to, it doesn't even make sense. We're just showing people that that's where our loyalty is, right? That we're here to teach about Jesus and to do the things that he says we're supposed to do. Not trust other people completely when they've already told us so much we're not supposed to be told or to do. So with that in mind, let us participate and thank God the Father, Jah, Jaho, Jahuah, for our life, for our physical body, for our ability to breathe and to think and to praise and honor him, to confess our mistakes in Jesus' name when we do things that he wouldn't want us to do because we get weak or we sin, but we don't use excuses. We know we have a condition. We know we have problems at times. That's no excuse to just submit to them, to forget to do what's right. And so we come together to proclaim what we believe is true, to acknowledge our mistakes, to proclaim the coming of the Lord, and to commit ourselves to him and what he did to the extent that we are given the Spirit from God through him to do. And with that, I'll take a quick look at the chat in case there's something important that I should address. And then we'll wrap things up. I thank you all once again. And that's a good point, Yoke Saarinen. And again, I apologize if I mispronounced your name. I probably did because we're just in America and in American English, we don't always get the European pronunciation or some of the letters that we see represented in different languages correctly. I think Yoke, if I have that correct, makes a good point here. He says, the thing that I still struggle about the 1914 teaching is that World War I just happened to start that year. I see no textual reasons to accept the 1914 teaching, but just seemed like that quite the coincidence. Yeah, no doubt, right? I mean, it kind of does. So that's really the question. Well, we'll take one quick look at the text. Let's look at NWT, right? Let's go ahead and go to Matthew 24. Hey, you're right. You okay? It does kind of seem. Now, keep in mind, the Watchtower's original understanding for 1914. Well, I mean, skipping past a few things, getting specific to 1914, they felt everything would end in that year. And it wasn't, there are a lot of interpretations they've had about that period of time. But there's no question that a world war or a war of any kind, really, right? I mean, even the Ukraine-Russian war today is significant, but right, one with multiple nationalities involved would be considered significant. Now, that's not the, there have been extensive, right? You could look at well, for example, Rome was the one object in terms of the sacking of Rome in the 4th century and successively in the 5th century, I should say. I believe it was. I think, was it the Huns that first? Let's verify that. Let's verify when Rome was sacked. I think it was in the 5th century when it was first sacked. But I want to verify that. I don't like to be incorrect if possible. So let's go to Google. Um, yes, 5th century, early 5th century, by the Visigoths in 410 AD. So, however, there were a lot of other nations and groups leading up to this, right? Like if we look at the Huns, right? So if the Visigoths, right? So the sack of Rome on 24 August 410 was undertaken right here by the Visigoths, led by their king Alaric. At that time, Rome was no longer the capital of the Western. And then you have the sack of Aquileia occurring in 452, carried out by the Huns. Let's just verify. Yeah, 451, Attila and the Huns, who already became powerful, they paid an annual tribute. They were paid an annual tribute by Rome, invaded Gaul in an alliance with the Vandals. So you had sort of a succession, a continuous period of invasion of Rome. And so, the destruction of Rome brought about such a dramatic change in the then known world and plunged a lot of the conveniences and trade into chaos. I think to say that World War I was so dramatically different in terms of its effect on the then known world, probably it would still rank up there, but the idea that we don't have a world war prior to that period or a multinational invasion, let's go to Matthew 24 and see what's happening. Matthew 24. Yeah, I nonetheless think, okay, it's a good point. I think there's nothing wrong with saying, yeah, that's an interesting, that is something. Okay, we can acknowledge that. Is that exactly what Matthew 24 is saying, though? I don't really think it is talking about a great multinational war. We can accept that as a possibility. I don't think it describes things in ways that rule that out. But let's read it. All right, here's the NWT. Matthew 24. All right, so let's go to all right. So while he was sitting on the Mount of Olives, the disciples approached him privately, saying, "Tell us, when will these things be, and what will be the sign of your presence and of the conclusion of the system of things?" In answer, he said to them, "Look out that nobody misleads you. For many will come on the basis of my name, saying, 'I am the Christ,' and will mislead many. You are going to hear of wars and reports of wars. See that you are not terrified, for these things must take place. But the end is not yet. For Nation will rise against nation and kingdom against kingdom, and there will be food shortages and earthquakes in one place after another. These things are a beginning of pangs of distress, right? So verse 6 begins by saying, you're going to hear of wars and reports of wars. Don't worry about it, right? I think we can agree on that. And then it says in the second part, for these things must take place. What things, right? Well, probably from verse 4, right? No one misleading you, I am the Christ. And then, of course, what he just said. You're going to hear of wars and reports of wars. These things must take place, but the end is not yet, right? So he's saying you're going to see these things, but this is not the end. Don't worry about it. The question is this verse 7 for nation against nation, kingdom against kingdom, a separate, subsequent, multinational war? Or even if even if after it, you could have more wars and reports of wars, so not necessary, but is verse 7 presenting a subsequent multinational war that is different from wars and reports of wars in verse 6? Obviously, the Watchtower believes that it is, right? That in verse 7, you've got this unique world war, and these are just other wars and reports of wars. Don't worry about those. I don't think that's correct, right? So, because remember, he breaks to say the end is not yet, but I think he's just resuming what he was just telling them before going on to describe more features of what will happen before the end. This break right here, for these things must take place, but the end is not yet, that provides him with a basis for resetting what he just said. You're going to hear of wars and reports of wars. For nation will rise against nation and kingdom against kingdom, right? Look, if we just take out the part where he interrupts himself, basically, right? Because he's describing what is going to mark his presence and the end of the system, right? So if we just say, you are going to hear of wars and reports of wars, see that you're not terrified, for nation will rise against nation and kingdom against kingdom. You see? It's the exact same thing. He's just telling them, you're going to hear of wars and reports of wars. Don't worry, because nation's going to rise against nation and kingdom against kingdom. It's going to happen. Because of this break right here, the second part of verse 6, it makes it easier to sell the idea or believe, genuinely believe. I think at this point, it's probably more of a sell. But either way, at some point, you could genuinely say this does kind of make it seem like there's another nation, this is something else, right? I don't think so. I think if he didn't break to tell them the end isn't yet, like he just started telling them the signs, right? And then he stops to tell them not to worry because the end isn't yet. And then he goes right back to what he was just saying. If we eliminate, as I just did one more time, we eliminate that part, the break. Let's read it. You are going to hear of wars and reports of wars. See that you're not terrified. For nation will rise against nation and kingdom against kingdom. Now it sounds like something that directly connects, right? Let's go to the Bible Hub. Let's go ahead and do that. And see, I believe the word for, gar, is there. And that really provides a basis for introducing what is more of an explanation for what was just said. Something consistent with it for sure. Let's go to the Bible Hub. And then we'll wrap it up, everyone, because we've already partaken. And I'll see you again later this evening for our I and the Father are one. Has nothing to do with the Trinity video, John 10:30. But right before we close up, let's go ahead and look at Matthew 24. And verses 6 and 7. Let's first go to the multi, and then we have the Greek right over here on the right. And some of that, well, here's a NA27, it looks like, or with variants. Multiple different Greek texts here on the right side. On the English, though, Oh, we have to go to 20. Right. So they all basically say the same thing. Beware. Watch out. Don't do your good deeds publicly to be my brothers for your. Oh, wait, where am I? No, I'm in Matthew. I need Matthew 24. Sorry about that. Right. Matthew 24, NIV. You will hear of wars and rumors of wars, but see to it you are not alarmed. Such things must happen, but the end is still to come. New American Standard, you will be hearing of wars and rumors of wars. See that you're not frightened, for those things must take place, but that is not yet the end. Net Bible, you will hear of wars and rumors of wars. Make sure you're not alarmed, for this must happen, but the end is still to come. Let's look at verse 7 now. Now, NIV does not use the word for, like the NWT right here. Verse 7, right there, the word for. Oh, I'm sorry. Let me bring you guys up. I'll show you what I was just showing you, but you weren't watching yet. My bad. But here's the word for in the NWT, right? Verse 7, Matthew 24. So now if we look at the Bible Hub, NIV, it doesn't use for, just says nation will rise against nation, kingdom against kingdom. There will be famines and earthquakes in various places. English Standard uses for. New American Standard uses for. King James uses for. Holman, Net Bible, King James 2000, American Standard uses for. Okay, what does the Greek say? Then here's the, it looks like they all say for, right? Because they're all using the word gar right here. It's a term that doesn't occupy the first position in a sentence. And so that's why you have even though it is the first word in a translated sentence, grammatically in Greek, it occupies a secondary position. It doesn't come first. So here's the word for right there. Gar. And it helps to explain what is being discussed or referred to. So for some reason, NIV fails to represent that transition here. NWT and other texts do, and it's in the Greek text explicitly. Let me just bring up my Nestle Aland. I have the 26th edition online here on my separate laptop that I haven't connected here yet, but I will shortly. It also gives me Rolf's and a few other texts that we use frequently. And so it uses GAR as well. This is the Nestle text of 1904, probably for copyright issues, right? And it gives variants of Nestle Aland 27 here with the Westcott and Hort edition. Also uses GAR right there. All of these Greek texts, the Tischendorf 8th edition, GAR. So, if we go back to NWT, I meant to do this way. Let me just go over that again so you can see, right? You might not have been able to see it because of the way I had my face monitored a minute ago. So as you can see now, real briefly, here's NIV, right? No for. Here's the English Standard. There's for. New American Standard, for. King James, for, right? You can look at this on your own. Here's the Greek word for gar in all the Greek editions. And so we bring up NWT again. If we do what I did twice already, and we don't allow that break, that second part of verse 6, yake or yoke, if we don't allow that to distract us, to me, it seems like verse 7 is just picking up and explaining or referring back to, after the break, gar, what he just said in verse 6. You are going to hear of wars and reports of wars. See that you are not terrified, for nation will rise against nation and kingdom against kingdom. So I believe the use of gar here really is essential in the translation. NIV has an error there, an error of omission. And NWT, the Watchtower's not really followed. They're being, if we're going to be charitable to them, I think they're just allowing this part to distract them. They're allowing the break in verse 6 that just tells them not to worry because it's not the end yet. They're allowing them to see a disconnect between the start of verse 6 and the start of verse 7. But I believe the use of gar effectively connects the two and shows clearly there's a relationship between what he just said before he broke to tell them the end isn't yet, but he initially started telling them the signs of what would lead to that, right? And then that's immediately what he resumes doing in verse 7. So I don't see any difference between this first part of verse 6 and this first part of verse 7. I understand the Watchtower does, and if you do, and you see that as a point in their favor, in the sense that it's predictive, or what they did early on was semi or somewhat predictive, if not predictive on some level, of a global war, fine. Then that's how you see it, and you're entitled to that. It didn't sound like you were totally convinced, so that's fine. And even if you were, well, that's something you're entitled to do as well. We don't follow the Watchtower in terms of its chronology and beliefs about 1914 and 1919, but part of the reason has to do with this, in my view anyway. Others may have other reasons. I think this is talking about the same thing in the first part of verse 6 as in the first part of verse 7. Wars and reports of wars that were not to be terrified are nation against nation. That's right. That's wars and reports of wars. When nation rises against nation and kingdom against kingdom, that's the same thing as wars happening. You're going to hear wars and reports of wars. Why? Gar? Because nation's going to rise against nation and kingdom against kingdom. That's why. That's just what they do. Like wild beasts, right? I think that's what's happening in Matthew 24, 6 and 7. All right, let's see if there's any reaction to that before I sign off and do things before I come in. Bankhead! Bankhead joined the show. Let me see, did Yake pronounce? Let me see if he gave a pronunciation. I'll try to read this later. Oh, it's Finnish, he says. Okay. Did he define it somewhere? I'm not sure. Oh, he says I'm close enough. Yoke Sararinen. I'll just go with it until you give me something better to work with. I'll try to get it better. I don't like to mispronounce names, even if I don't know them. But right, I'm an American, and while I do know linguistics and languages fairly well, that doesn't mean I know how to pronounce everybody's name, and that's often the case with many Europeans. But I've learned that often the J is pronounced differently in many languages and many Indo-European languages. So that's something I figured would be the case. Let's see what else we got here. You pronounced it right, actually, close enough. Okay, so see. I appreciate it. You let me know though if I get it wrong. I don't want to perpetrate an error. Let's see here. Everett says the problem, as I see it, had more to do with the start date and than the end date. No doubt there, right? No doubt there, because there is no start date. There's no start date in terms of the 7 times, right? Maybe if you were gonna, like I suggest in my video on the appointed times of the nations, I did a whole video on CW Jah Talk about the appointed times of the nations. I talked about Luke and Daniel. And, if you're going to look at the trampling on of Jerusalem as beginning in the 1st century with the destruction of Jerusalem, the trampling on it by the nations, and then the subsequent continuous trampling on it by the nations, whether Europeans or Arabs, well, then you would have a start date for 70 CE, right? The appointed times of the Gentiles, appointed times of the nations in Luke, the Watchtower connects that with the 7 times of Daniel with no authority other than that's just how they connect it, right? So it's possible, I guess. It's possible you can make a connection with something in the Bible and be right. But the evidence from Daniel 4 has nothing to do with anything other than Nebuchadnezzar, right? That's all it talks about. It doesn't talk about anything or anyone else. And it doesn't even hint at it in any way, nor is it later talked about or brought up when we are given visions of the coming of the Messiah and future things, like in Daniel 7, right? So there's no basis for the interpretation to start where they put it. And then there's the whole question of whether it's 607 or 587, right? So, and beyond all that, it's just, the Bible tells us not to write. There's nothing to write about. All right. So all of a sudden there is. Why? Because of an undefined interpretation that you say is correct. And then if we don't agree with you on, you're going to shun us and consider us apostates who are permanently dead, second death. It's so over the top in terms of not just the interpretation, but even if you said, hey, it's possible, would you force someone? We only force people to force in terms of if you want to be a Christian witness of Jah. 3 things that are explicit in the Bible, right? You're going to force someone to believe in this chronology about 607 to 1914 that just happens to involve you being appointed in 1919 as the sole exclusive authority no one can question, and that you can continuously re-self-appoint no matter how many things you get wrong. You want us to believe all of that, or we're gone? We don't have a chance? We're not going to follow that, okay? That is so inappropriate and incorrect. And while at one time we may have been misled while we were not quite aware of these things yet, we're not going to go back to a mindset that absolutely involves condemning people with final judgment because we don't accept what we're told. We don't need anyone to be writing us about. And if someone tells us the end is drawn near, we're supposed to run away from you. We're supposed to not go after you. And you're telling us we have to believe you with no evidence other than this interpretive connection of things that you've come up with. It's not in the text. It's your interpretation. Very suspect. If we don't agree with you on that, we're an apostate from God and Jesus. You're actually telling everybody that. You're condemning all of us because we reject what you're telling us is true, and you don't have any explicit evidence that says it's true. You have an interpretation that is suspect at best, and you're acting like you have explicit evidence in the text to enforce this view on the level of one God the Father, the firstborn Son of God sent from heaven, our Messiah, and the golden rule? No, we reject all that. That has nothing to do with the Bible, nothing to do with the Messiah of the Bible. We have precedent in the Bible, Revelation 3, for the Ephesian Christians who stood up to people who claimed they were sent forth by God and found them to be liars. So we're not going to worry about what you think at all. And you're not even supposed to be doing the writing about the thing you're judging us over or the judging us at all. And you're all doing it to all of us. And in spite of all of that, we're going to keep meeting every Saturday as often as we can to partake and to build up an association of Christian witnesses of Jah who want to follow the Messiah, praise the God Jah, and treat each other the way we want to be treated, not the way a bunch of false teachers and liars want us to treat them. With that having been said, If you can join me later this evening, I'll be discussing I and the Father are one. Has nothing to do with the Trinity. John 10:30. Might have some new information for you. It often comes up, but Trinitarians continue to bring it up. And it's a text that I believe we should focus on. I was going to clip, I've talked about it in several shows, but I thought, let's just do a video. I'll present the text that really make clear what the Bible teaches and show once again it's absolutely in conflict with the Trinity. So may Jah bless you in Jesus' name until we meet again for another Christian Witnesses of Jah live discussion, hopefully next weekend, but if not, I'll let you know. Otherwise, have a great afternoon, evening, or morning, and I'll see you later on for our second live show video. Change the fan saying there. Looks like I need to put a little oil